Beaches mums. It's a privilege to be here with you tonight, and we've got a special occasion. Joeline Hackman, the independent candidate for the seat of Manly, is going to answer some questions from you. The way it's going to work, and I'll just explain, my name is David Barr, and I'm going to be asking Joeline some questions at the outset and then handing it over to you to ask your questions of her, and anything is the go. State elections are coming up on the 25th of March, Saturday the 25th. Very important that you have your say and that we get the right candidate in as our elected representative in Parliament in Macquarie Street. Now, in all the years the seat's been in existence, there has never been a woman MP. It's about time. Now, welcome, Joeline.
Thanks, David.
Do you want to tell us why you're standing?
Absolutely. So my name is Joeline Hackman, and I am a local. I grew up in Manly, Kangaroo Street, and then Narrabeen, and then much of the Northern Beaches in Bayview as well. I'm a local. I'm very passionate about my local community, and what I've realised is that there is not enough integrity in politics. We need faster action on climate change, and we need a person in Parliament who is going to take care of the people, and especially right now, considering the issues with cost of living, we need an independent representative who is going to be a voice for the people.
All right, tell us a bit about yourself, your background.
Yes.
You've told us why you want to stand, but what about your background? What have you been doing the past few years?
Yeah, sure. So I business, and while I've been doing that, I make sure that I always work with very good clients. I want clients who are doing things for the social good, and it's been a luxury to be able to choose those clients. And it's because of working in business that I understand the importance of having very clear goals and a roadmap to achieve those goals. Also, in my spare time, I have started two charities. One is the Northern Beaches War on Waste, and that was 5 years ago that I started that group. And it was because we needed to find some local solutions to global problems. I realised that a lot of my friends and community members needed to understand what we could do that was going to create an impact. So I started Northern Beaches War on Waste, and I have 2,000 lovely members there. And also at the beginning of the pandemic, I realised that local businesses were really struggling because of lockdown, and also that nurses were absolutely exhausted and needed some care. So with a couple of other friends, we co-founded Feed Our Medics, and we paid the businesses so they could stay afloat, as well as feeding the nurses. And it just made sense to put those two together.
Now, the War on Waste, that was related to the television program, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And I think everyone would remember in that television program where it had the tram that was filled with coffee cups, and it represented the 8 million single-use coffee cups that reach landfill in Australia every single day.
Yeah, I remember that. All right, so you've been door knocking, and you've been to meetings and met the locals. What are the issues, do you think, in this campaign?
Well, I think the number one issue is that people are really hurting. It is, the cost of living crisis is affecting everybody in different ways. And that is led by energy price increases and the war in the Ukraine, but as well some opportunities that we've missed locally. So cost of living, integrity, people are tired of the jobs for mates culture. And even today we saw an Upper House MP, Mr. Poulos, distributing photos of a colleague.
Of a rival,
right.
Yes, yes.
So the lack of integrity is just on the nose, I think, particularly for women. And we need to make sure that we're delivering better things for the community and not getting wrapped up in party politics. It's about the community.
Yeah, as far as cost of living is concerned, people are concerned that their children can't afford to live
Yes.
in the same suburb as they live.
Yes, absolutely. And I think
And the children are concerned too.
yes, I think the way that interest rates have been rising, and we've seen it again this week. It's been 9 consecutive interest rate rises, and that really does impact families. As we see at the same time, the cost of housing has increased much higher, much faster than the cost of wages. So there's a real discrepancy, and I know people that have been saving for homes for at least 10 years, and they're just never able to quite get on that property ladder. So it's something that the government and our community really need to look at. How do we address housing affordability, not just for younger people, although that is extremely important because you want your family to be close, but also for key workers, and for people who are suffering from domestic violence or emotional abuse. People need to have housing that they can afford, because it really is the fundamental basis of being able to be secure and enjoy life.
It's certainly one of the major issues that we're facing as a society.
Yes.
Adequate housing for everybody. And you mentioned key workers. For a long time now, councils have had difficulty attracting staff because they can't afford to live in the council area.
Exactly.
They have to travel miles to get to the council.
Yes, we're seeing that with teachers and with nurses and with cleaners. It is such a huge issue. And one of our policies is to make sure that at least 10% of homes are built for key workers specifically. I know teachers and nurses that have had to travel from further outside, out west, Central Coast, just to get to work. And if we want to have a society and a community where we have all of the key functions taken care of, then we need to take care of the people.
Yeah, we want people to be able to live near where they work.
Absolutely.
It's not asking too much.
Absolutely. And particularly if you are in one of those key professions, because it's exhausting. You have to get up early, you have to go home late, and you're giving and giving all day. I might add that many of those professions are actually female-dominated professions, and they're not paid at a rate of which we should value them. So if we did that, if we fixed the pay parity on those female-dominated industries, then perhaps there would be a little bit more space for those key workers to be able to afford their own financial independence and their own homes in this area. Another key thing is that Mirvac and Lendlease have come out recently saying that they're insisting 30% of housing should actually be for social housing or affordable housing. And as we've seen in the Brookvale Place Plan, which is on display at the moment, and the deadline is the 27th of February, if you wanted to go and create a submission, we had a 10% target for affordable homes in that Brookvale Place Plan, and then all of a sudden it was cut to 5%. I'd really like to see that increased, and I'd like to follow Mirvac and Lendlease's plan and be much more ambitious about housing those key workers and anyone else that needs support to live in this area and be part of our community.
I mean, that was quite a surprise, them doing that, and a welcome surprise at that. Yeah. The other thing about wages is that in relation to profits overall, wages have declined and declined, that we have to address that as a society. We have to address that at federal and state levels.
100%. I think that is so important. And also we hear that when we talk about wage increases, the naysayers say, let's not, burden inflation and get inflation out of control. But I note that that only comes up when we're talking about wage increases for people in the middle or people lower than the middle of the average income. When the CEOs are getting their bonuses or big corporations are getting things tax-free, then no one cares about inflation then. So I think there needs to be a bit more of a focus about how we can take care of the people who take care of the community.
Yeah, and housing certainly very critical in that.
Yes.
It's an enormous issue. All right, so the economy, it's always always important
Yes.
to people, because they have to pay their way, they've got to pay their mortgage, they've got to send their kids to school. It's all critical.
Yes.
What else is coming up?
So there is a little bit more on the economy that, if you don't mind, can I
ahead.
dig
Yes,
into?
yes.
Yes. What frustrates me, what really frustrates me, is the greenwashing that happens, and I guess it's the eco-washing now.
Yes.
Is that we've been told in the last decade or two that the Liberals are good financial managers, and what I've seen from New South Wales government Liberal perspective is that they've been in government for the last 12 years. And New South Wales has the largest budget deficit. It's $11.4 billion. And Queensland was in a similar position last year, at the beginning of the financial year. And I'm sure many of our viewers tonight know, but the coal price, because of the illegal war in Russia and Ukraine, made the coal prices soar. Now, the rate that we were getting for those minerals was actually quite low, and we didn't negotiate. New South Wales government did not negotiate a better rate for the coal that was being sold off. So had New South Wales Liberals been good economic managers, they would have said, look, you guys are getting huge profits. Those minerals belong to the people of New South Wales. We want a fair price for them. Queensland did that. And what happened in Queensland is that Palaszczuk and Cameron Dick, the Treasurer in Queensland, they said, we want a fair price for those minerals for the people of Queensland. And they got more than $2 billion every month for the last 9 months. And Queensland is now in a budget surplus. New South Wales government did not manage the economy very well. They did not get a fair price for those minerals. And now here we are languishing with an $11.3 billion deficit. It's just been upgraded an extra $100 million this week. And the forecast for next year has actually doubled. So it's doubled to more than $3.5 billion additional for next year. So it's no longer true. New South Wales Liberal National Party are not good economic managers. And what's more, if they had have been a little bit more focused on helping us transition to net zero and a cleaner energy economy, then our bills right now would be a lot lower. We would have more renewable power, our energy bills would be a lot lower, and we would not be having this crunch of cost of living crisis. The deny and delay tactics have led us to this unfortunate situation where we all have this cost of living pressure at home.
Well, an egregious example of bad financial management is our local hospital,
Right.
Northern Beaches Hospital.
Right, yes.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So there was another deal done during the last term of government. Maybe it was the last 2 terms of government, took a long time to roll out. Either way, in the last 12 years, the Liberal National Party have been in power. They did a deal with a local hospital where they were given $1.2 billion of public money to develop our hospital and the surrounding infrastructure. $1.2 billion. Now, the deal that we got in return as the public was $1. We got $1 back every year from the consortium that owns that hospital. So it's run by Healthscope, and they are very good at service delivery from categories 1 to 4. Great service. The staff there are amazing. The owners, though, Brookfield, are actually in a Cayman Islands offshore fund, not paying tax to New South Wales or Australia, and they are enjoying the financial profits of New South Wales taxpayer dollars. Now, I, for one, don't think that that's a very just or fair way to use taxpayer funds. I think that the New South Wales government should have negotiated a better deal, and it's the same with transport. You know, I can see that the West Connects tunnel, the new extension was just built, and we got a notification that it was $11 to go in that section of the tunnel. Now, that means that in the future, if we have a tunnel here, that money, all those tolls, are going to go to a private enterprise. So Chris Minns just announced this week that he's going to limit to $60 any tolls that New South Wales people use on the roads here. But still, that is the government subsidising those tolls to the private enterprises. So I feel like the New South Wales Liberal National Party has sold off a bunch of assets, and they've used this mechanism to move public money into private organisations at the expense of New South Wales. It's a huge deficit we're in.
Yeah, well, I mean, the hospital example whereby the lease was given to HealthScope, and HealthScope did run 40-odd hospitals and the leasehold for this. The car park there, which is worse than the car park at Sydney Airport, is $1 a year for 40 years.
Yes.
And then Brookfield bought out HealthScope for $4.5 billion, and so we have a private equity fund basically and running the show, and their main interest, of course, is the bottom line. It's not health is not the key thing; it's profit.
Yes.
And so it just seems the wrong model, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think it's concerning when you have a hospital that is very oriented towards delivering for profit. But I have really closely looked at the metrics, and Northern Beaches Hospital does deliver very well on the key top 4 metrics. It's just on the level 5 metrics where it looks like there's a bit more prioritisation for private patients, but they do deliver very well from a service perspective. It's just the profit-centred model and the use of public funds to profit an offshore company that's not paying tax that I have an issue with.
Me too.
Yeah. I think we all should have an issue with that.
I mean, that hospital was supposed to be a public hospital. Is that
Right.
That's simple, and you expect the state to be funding that.
Yes, and honestly, if I was an investor into Brookfield, I would be so delighted because Mona Vale and Manly, the two biggest competing businesses, were demolished. They were taken away. So what a great deal for those Cayman Island non-tax-paying enterprises.
Yeah. All right. That's so. Financial management of the state is certainly a big issue, and the current Liberal National Party government has always made out that they're the best managers.
Right.
I mean, there's been rampant asset stripping over the years.
Yes.
I think of the Land Titles Office and that kind of thing, and I think the public think it's all gone too far.
Yes, I agree. And I think it has gone too far, and I think there needs to be greater transparency in those government contracts. We need to know when something's not working, at what point can we actually pull up the contract and say this isn't right. As an example, the ferries in Manly, we have those beautiful freshwater class ferries, and granted, they need to be kept up to survey. They need to be in good condition. So all of a sudden, it was announced that the Emerald class ferries were turning up, and they weren't fit for purpose. They threw someone off the back of the ferry during rough seas. They get cancelled frequently. They've got mechanical failures, and look, I understand that there were some teething issues when the freshwaters were first implemented, but not on the scale of these Emerald ferries. They might be fine for the Parramatta River, but they are not fit for purpose for Manly.
It's crossing their heads.
Yeah, and so that kind of thing needs to have transparency in the contract. Who has that contract? What's the relationship? Who's taking responsibility? And can we get a refund? That is not a good use of public money.
Yeah, I mean, trains has been the same thing. There's bubbling about, the Spanish company wants $700 million, I think, for refits of trains. So,
right.
The way transport's been handled hasn't been particularly good.
No. And I'm hearing as well, I'm not sure if you've heard this, but hundreds of bus services have been cancelled. And it's been particularly frustrating for parents who are sending their children out to the buses to go to school, and the buses just aren't showing up.
And that's happening around here.
It's happening right now, yeah. It's been happening for the last several months. And unfortunately, parents have had to go and answer the phone call for their children, and they're saying that the bus just hasn't arrived. And commuters as well, parents themselves that need to get to work, are having to make alternative arrangements. So what it's doing is, by not having a reliable bus service, it's actually driving people, excuse the pun, into their cars. Yeah, which is creating more of a backlog, and that's frustrating people. So the thing is that we need to make sure that we are again, providing affordable homes for bus drivers to live in, giving them a decent wage, run preferably by a public company so they can be taken care of, and to make sure that we've got a reliable bus service so that our city works. You know, we can go anywhere in 20 minutes rather than being stuck waiting for public transport or sitting in your car that everyone doesn't like.
Well, a livable city is where people have houses they can afford and transport system that suits where they need to go, their commute to work and back.
Exactly. It seems simple, and I feel like that's the role of the government to get that right.
Yeah, and we haven't had it right yet, have we?
No.
Yeah.
No, but I definitely have a lot of ideas and some community consultation to continue to make sure that we do get that right, not just for today, but also looking forward for the next few decades.
Okay, now moving on to the issue of transparency and corruption. Now, most politicians say they stand for transparency,
yes,
that they're all for it, but they're not really.
Mm-hmm.
What's your view on all of this?
I think politicians are meant to be leaders, and so part of leadership is being true in your words and also in your actions. So there shouldn't be that duplicity. I feel like appointments should be made that are absolutely independently made. It shouldn't be by your friends or someone in your party or anything like that. I also feel like...
Are we talking about appointments to New York?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Definitely no jobs for mates. I feel like things like the ICAC report from Gladys, while many people absolutely love her, I feel like we need to have transparency. We deserve transparency before we vote about what actually went on there. And also the bushfire funding, I could not believe. I was so disappointed because I thought that being political about bushfire victims was well below anyone in the state.
It's belt, isn't it?
So
yes.
it's just disgusting that 96% of those bushfire relief funds actually went just to Liberal seats.
Yeah, Blue Mountains lost out.
Yeah.
It's disgraceful.
It really is. And I expect better of our politicians.
What about ICAC?
I would really love ICAC. I mean, it's great that we have one at the state level and now at the federal level. Thank you so much to the independents at the federal level for driving that. It's great. But ICAC at the state level needs to be independently funded, because just the same way that Trump in the States narrowed things down so he couldn't be interviewed, at our state level, New South Wales ICAC also needs to be independently funded, because ICAC needs to investigate the government and it needs to have that autonomy to do so.
Yeah, politicians aren't particularly fond of that, the major parties, but an independent ICAC, well-funded, is what's needed.
Yes.
I do think with the Berejiklian issue, it's gone on too long.
Yes.
So it needs to be a time limit placed on ICAC, I think, for its investigation.
That's a great idea. Yes, I think we've spoken about that.
Yeah, some of the eminent people involved in this sort of thing have said that.
Yes.
Keep it to a year and no more.
I think the public should know what they're voting on, and I think that any of these issues that arise, we need transparency on. We deserve it. We are paying these public service people, and we should be able to decide with full transparency.
Yeah, I think the other thing about ICAC is it uncovers a lot of council corruption.
Yeah.
And that's always going to be ongoing because of development issues and the money that can be made by adding an extra story or whatever. So we need a strong ICAC to keep an eye on what councils are doing.
Yes, I think that's very important, and I'm actually talking to an ex-ICAC commissioner next week, particularly about strengthening those enforcement rules, and I would love to understand a little bit better about how we can shorten that and make sure that we get results within a year.
Yeah, by funding them properly for a start, I guess, so they have more staff and that kind of thing. All right, exactly. So because this government has had a whiff of, not necessarily corruption, but close to, with some people about things it's done, and that the deck needs to be cleared so that we know that governments are acting above board the whole time.
Yes, they're leaders. They should be demonstrating with their actions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the issue of environment and climate. That's
Yes.
still huge, isn't it?
It's a huge driving force. I think behind economy and housing affordability and cost of living, the climate and economy is something that is really dear to people's hearts.
Yeah, and the two are not mutually exclusive.
No.
So what would you like to see as far as climate change is concerned?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off the list, obviously, is PEP 11 stopped dead in the water.
Yeah.
It has been quite a debacle. I'm not sure if your viewers have had time to be watching in the last couple of weeks.
Can you just explain PEP 11?
Yeah, okay. So PEP 11, it is exploration off the coast, basically from Manly all the way up to Newcastle. And a particular company has applied to drill for oil and gas off the coast. And I don't know if many of you have been to LA, but there are huge eyesores of construction out there while they are searching for oil and gas. This application is only for gas. However, where there's smoke, there's fire, and where there's gas, there's oil. So the leaks that happen in the water, the oil leaks, are absolutely disastrous, not only for the animals, but also for humans that are enjoying the water. And we just can't afford to have that kind of environmental risk, let alone the eyesore off the water that we enjoy so much. So what's happened in the last couple of weeks is that it has been listed again on the federal court list because Asset Energy decided to appeal the court decision, and they wanted to be compensated basically for it being cancelled last year. So you may remember Scott Morrison appointed himself as many ministers, and that was one thing that he did, I believe it was around May last year, April, May last year, and he said that he's going to stop it. The federal court said that that wasn't legal for him to do that, and it wasn't unbiased.
So there wasn't due process.
Right. So it was listed again, and it came up again on the federal court list this last week. And Zali Steggall and Sophie Scomps have been very vocal about supporting this to be ruled out at a federal level. And Zali introduced on Monday her Protect Our Beaches bill, Save Our Beaches bill. However, what some of the independents, Jackie Scrooby, Alex Greenwich, Justin Field, Helen Conway, and Victoria Davidson and Karen Freya and I, we knew that this was going to be coming up again because we saw it on the federal court list. And we thought, how can we actually stop this at a state level? It's a state issue. And so we looked through the legislation and we spoke to constitutional lawyers, and we went through the process of actually drafting up a bill to stop PEP 11 dead in the water for good. Why should it be a federal issue? It's an environmental issue affecting New South Wales. So we drafted up this legislation, and 12 days ago we announced it with Alex Greenwich in Parliament, at the back of Parliament House. Parliament House is under renovation at the moment. We announced it and presented it to the media, and then only 12 days later the Liberals understood that there was quite a risk with people who were still vying for their positions, who wanted to speak out on the environment, actually doing the job that the Liberals are meant to do. So we legislated. For a long time, we've just heard, oh, we're against PEP 11, oh, we're going to stop it. But it's actually their job to legislate. So within 12 days of us presenting that legislative bill, the Liberal Party finally thought, well, let's actually do something about it. And they announced that they are going to stop it and change the legislation. However, we still don't have any detail on that legislation. We don't know if the legislation is just about gas. It could still mean that they're allowed to drill for oil. We don't know. And we don't know whether or not the legislation is going to block out any, wind turbines or any future investigations whatsoever. So what we've learned, however, is that the independents are driving change even before we're elected. And the Liberal Party they're following. And we're trying to show them how to do their job. And so we'll be keeping a close eye on their legislation and making sure it gets delivered and Pepper Evans stopped.
You were at a function today, weren't you, about this?
Yes.
Yeah. That was at Mona Vale.
Yes. Do you want to hear about it?
I do want to hear about it, yeah.
So what happened is that Surfrider put forward a demonstration, a community demonstration in Manly for 11 a.m. And the Liberal Party caught wind of this and they didn't want all the negative publicity. So what they did was they put on a press conference in Mona Vale at exactly the same time. So Surfrider learned about this and decided to go and go next to the Liberal Party announcement. And it was actually quite wonderful because the Liberals said, we're introducing legislation. Surfrider said, we've been asking for this for years. Why didn't you do this years ago? You've been in power for 12 years. Why has it taken you so long?
It called an election.
Yeah. And then the independents had their say and we said, look, we did it 12 days ago. You should have done it 12 years ago. So, yeah, it's really, really good that the community has come together. But what it's showing is that the Liberal Party is not acting unless it has pressure on it from independents.
Now, an issue close to my heart, koalas.
Yes.
We're watching the possibility of koalas going extinct under this government, at least in lots of areas.
Yes. It's something that really frustrates me, and I'm sure frustrates many of your viewers here tonight, because we only have 50,000 koalas left in New South Wales, and last year they were added to the threatened species list. Now, we have heard so much greenwashing about the koalas that it is really one of my driving forces, and it would be one of the bills, one of the very first bills that I would present in Parliament, because there is a koala policy 2050 from the government. However, all the conservationists are very clear that all the koalas will be dead by 2050. Right now, this week, in Coffs Harbour, there is logging happening exactly in koala habitat. People are filming the koalas in the trees and the loggers coming and logging those trees. Now, I'm pretty sure that many of your viewers would understand that the huge bushfire loss in 2019-2020 Black Summer, that resulted in 65% of New South Wales bushland being destroyed. Now, those trees were still smoking, and the carcasses of the 1 to 3 billion animals that were incinerated, yeah, during that time, were still smoking. And the Forestry Corporation was still sending in trucks to log whatever trees were still standing. And the communities in the South Coast and in the Northeast were so heartbroken because they know that animals aren't going to survive unless you have all of the old trees. Now, native forest logging is such a problem in this state. The land clearing that is happening in New South Wales alone is equal to a Sydney CBD size full of trees being cleared every 2 days. Now, I've got a 7 and an 8-year-old, and even my 7-year-old would know that if you cut down all the trees, there is nowhere for koalas to live. So ending native forest logging, making sure that there's greater compliance for the forestry organisations, because at the moment they're self-regulated. They go in like a bull in a china shop, and then they just cut down a ton of trees. They're meant to keep some, but they knock them down. At the end, it just looks like a complete disaster zone. And I went down with the Nature Conservation Council down to the South Coast and saw the absolute destruction and the lack of enforcement by the EPA. And it's so concerning. There's just nowhere for koalas to live. The trees are being cut down at a rate that is just immeasurably fast. And also, Australia is one of 7 countries in the world who are responsible for 50% of the biodiversity loss. You all remember Attenborough's films saying about the importance of biodiversity. Well, we are actually responsible for more, our fair share of more than our fair share of 50% of biodiversity loss. 7 countries, and we are all responsible for 50%.
It's a shameful record.
Right, we've got to stop cutting down trees.
Now, notwithstanding the bushfires 2 years ago and so, we've had the New South Wales National Party Agricultural Minister in December wanting to ram through legislation to make it easier to chop trees down.
Right.
And that went through Cabinet.
Yes.
And Theresa said the Cabinet approved it. That includes the Environment Minister, who happens to be the current local member in Manly, James Griffin. That there was some backlash from Liberal Party members. The whole thing seems to pull back for the moment.
Yes.
But to consider that they were going to allow even more widespread land clearing is quite extraordinary.
It is, and I'll just tell your viewers this. What actually happened is that they were reviewing native vegetation laws, and they were trying to do a carve-out so that if the native vegetation was on private land, that you were able to just clear it.
Yeah, and without local councils getting involved.
Right, but koalas don't know the difference between is that private land or is that public land. All they know is I can't connect to another tree, I can't get food, and I can't breed. So this is massively contributing to the loss of koalas. And at the end of November, it did die down because Parliament ended. But the native vegetation laws, when they were discussed, Catherine Cusack pushed the State Environment Minister, James Griffin, and she asked him to state his record on his position on this. And he wouldn't state anything. Instead, he diverted and started talking about his record on the environment. And I know that if we sit here and do exactly what we've been doing, what we've been allowing the Liberal National Party to do, is they are going to continue cutting down the trees at a rate faster than ever before. The koalas are going to be extinct, though every single tree is a carbon sink, and we are not ever going to meet our carbon reduction goals. In fact, sorry if I get too technical here, but let's switch to something more tangible for our viewers in a sec. But since the Paris Agreement in 2016, Australia agreed, and the New South Wales government agreed, to limit our carbon emissions and to reduce them on the 2005 levels. What's actually happened since then, just in the last term of government, the people that you elected in the last term of government have actually approved 19 new coal and gas mines, and the trajectory of the emissions that contributes to is absolutely huge. So we had them mapped. I had them mapped by a climate scientist because I needed to understand.
Red's bad.
The blue, the red's bad. The blue is where our current emissions trajectory was, and this is when we agreed to limit the emissions. Instead, 19 new coal and gas projects just in the last 4 years have been approved, increasing our emissions by 6. We've had a 6-fold increase. So they say one thing, I'll reduce my emissions, we're on track, and they do exactly the opposite. And we cannot afford to have emissions 6-fold than what they were, and we cannot afford to have so many trees cut down and our koalas go extinct.
Now, Joeline, I've asked you questions and you've answered them very well. Now it's turn for the viewers to ask their questions. And the one of these is, what are your thoughts? This is from Nicola. What are your thoughts in regards to getting women back in the workforce as opposed to the cost of childcare, big issue?
Yes, okay. So, Nicole, thank you so much for your question. And this is a topic that is always hotly debated on Northern Beaches Mums. I fully support women choosing what is the best outcome for their family, and that's going to be different for different women at different times of their lives. What I really believe is that, like you, we grew up being told that we were in the next generation and that we were going to be able to have it all. We could choose to have both career, family, and get it all done. What we didn't know is that there wouldn't be as much structural support as what we needed, and that the burden of childcare and the mental load and all of the, doing the birthday parties and all of those things would really fall onto us. And things are changing, and there are unique situations that are very different, and many people are trying to get to that 50-50, and every family is different. However, what I think we should have is the choice. I think we should allow funded preschools, which is fantastic, and to make sure that there is a bit more structure around, if you have to work until 5 o'clock or 8 p.m, that there is somewhere for your children to be where you're not pulling in favours all the time. There needs to be more structural support, and I think we should look to Europe about how they manage that process a little better, because if you've got half of the women struggling with all of the multi-jobs that they need to do, then that's not your full team really acting in the economy. So I'm definitely pro-choice, and get women and men the support that they need to be their full selves.
Yeah, there needs to be more flexibility in work hours.
Yes.
That's one of the
Yes.
big issues, yes. There's a comment made by... it's gone. Anyway.
Claire says, what would you like to
yeah,
see?
Yeah. Claire, what would you like to see when it comes to mental health plans and programs?
Thank you so much for your question, Claire. Obviously, starting Feed Our Medics, I have close relationships with nurses and GPs and up at the hospital. For me, the news that the GP mental health plan that closed, that halved recently, I think is exactly the opposite of what we needed. What we need is more access to community health and mental health. And particularly during COVID and post-COVID, there's been so much pressure, and I know that the rates of domestic violence went up during that time, and children were isolated, and they're relearning all of those skills that really do contribute to mental health. What I also know is that not every family can afford to go to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a specialist. And many of them can't afford to pay the out-of-pocket expenses to go to a GP. And there's a knock-on effect. When you can't afford to go to a GP, there's a knock-on effect down the line, and that means more presentations at hospitals. And we need to make sure that system is streamlined and working for everybody. And very importantly, to my point about the Liberal Party doing one thing and then saying one thing and then doing another, more than a year ago, it was announced that the New South Wales government, the Liberal Party, was going to deliver 4 mental health beds up at Northern Beaches Hospital. And there are so many families that have needed that support, and it hasn't been there because those beds have not been delivered. We need delivery of those mental health beds and more support to help children and adults get the mental health support that they need.
Right. Question from Lizzie. How might you help those struggling in the current housing crisis?
Yeah, I think there's so many different tiers around that, Lizzie. I mean, struggling in the current housing crisis, I don't know whether or not you're renting or you own a home and the interest rates are harming your budget. But I understand that it is very challenging to even be able to afford a home for yourself and your family. So what I would propose is having those social housing targets and the housing affordability targets to make sure that people are homed in the area in which they live. The other thing that I think is a good opportunity that we could take is, if you are a key worker, say you're a nurse or a teacher or a paramedic, when you start training, I think you should have those doors opened to housing, because we want people to be able to work and help our community, but you shouldn't have to pay a huge amount to be in an industry where we need more people to enrol. So I'd like to see a stepped approach immediately for people in the key industries, and I think it would encourage people to develop their training in there. The other thing about that is, Lizzie, the affordability of energy and transport and housing are absolutely huge. If I've got an idea, stay with me here. So,
Bear with you. Bear with you.
so was talking to a climate energy finance expert recently, and he deals with big banks, of which 50 to 60% are of housing stock. That's their investment. And it's a $3 trillion housing portfolio that these huge banks have. I'm coming back to you, don't worry, just stay with me. Anyway, he says a great idea would be to give a rebate to homeowners who are willing to do modifications to their home so that they can reduce their energy costs. So as an example, if you put solar panels on, you get a hot water system, hot water pump, and you electrify things in your home, that would give you like an Energy Star rating, like you have on your appliances. And when you go to sell your house, if you have one, or if you go to rent a house, you would have an energy rating based on stars. And if you had a higher energy rating, energy efficiency rating on your home, then you would be able to attract more finance for it. It would have a higher value. Also, it would be cheaper because if you're renting the home, your energy bills aren't as high. So it's a win for the banks because it means that their risks to do with climate change are lower, because a huge amount of the housing stock, 98% of the housing stock that already exists, would be able to transfer over to renewable energy, and it would reduce their risks. It's a win for the homeowners because they get lower costs and they get a higher value to their home because of the energy rating. And it's a win for the renters because they get cheaper energy bills. So there are tons of ideas like this about how getting the right people in government could actually make a huge difference to affordability and people's everyday lives.
Now, one aspect about the housing crisis is the issue of domestic violence and refugees and women who need to find alternative accommodation from the house where they're being abused.
Yes, and we saw during COVID that the demand for those kind of services went up, and we know that one woman dies at the hands of their partner per week in Australia. And we also know that for women between the ages of 18 to 44, so of childbearing age, the biggest risk to their health, the second biggest risk to their health is smoking. The first biggest risk is living with a partner. That's how prolific domestic violence is. And there's so much structural there's so much structural change that can happen. And I tell you what, it starts with getting rid of people like Pat Poulos, who, if he worked in a corporation in Australia, would be fired. Unfortunately, he's being defended by Matt Keane and for sharing sexual content of a colleague. So weeding out the corruption, weeding out the lack of integrity, I think is going to make a huge difference for women in New South Wales.
Okay, so Marie's asked about NDIS and how can you ensure it's fair and adequate. The NDIS, of course, is a federal scheme, so, but nevertheless, there's state input into it. So
yes, well, and there is state input into the NDIS, but I understand that it is distributed federally. However, there are plenty of local community organisations that really provide that connection and that pathway through the NDIS program. So I think another thing that's really important for anyone that does access the NDIS is making sure that they get support, because it is a tough job taking care and being a carer for someone who is eligible on the NDIS. I personally would need to work with the federal and the state and the local levels of government, as well as community groups. And I can tell you that I have had neurodiversity in my extended family, and it is something that I completely understand, and I know the burden for women as carers for our parents and for our children and for people with difficulties. So you can be assured that I have a ton of compassion, and I will work very hard to make sure that you get taken care of as well.
Now, one of the issues that's become big in the last few weeks is poker machine reform.
Yes.
And so how do you feel about that? cool.
Poker machines. Well, I read the Crime Commission report at the end of last year, and it is absolutely disgusting the impact that poker machines have had on our community. I mean, two of the biggest outlets are on the northern beaches, and not many people know, but on the northern beaches, more than $2 million is lost to poker machines every single week. More than $2 million. And I know that there's a huge ripple effect on the families of those people that do have gambling issues, but also on the schools. The children are being sent to school without enough food, or bills aren't being paid, holidays aren't being taken, the local businesses aren't being supported. It's impacting domestic violence, it's impacting mental health. The cost of losing $1,000 in the poker machines actually has a $7,000 social cost. So there's a huge ripple effect. Now, I absolutely applaud Perrottet for taking a stand against those big lobby groups. However, what is proposed is way too far in the future, and it also isn't going to be enough to stamp out gambling harm. We need to have an independent or several independents in government to drive better legislation. That needs to come sooner. We need to power down pokies after midnight, because who's making a good choice after midnight about their financial situations?
Especially when they can access booze and it's
right. We need to have a statewide self-exclusion register, because at the moment you can just get an Uber to a different location and keep spending your family money. You know, it's not okay. We need to, people with gambling problems call up their banks and they say, please stop me from accessing my money during these times, or if I'm near a poker machine place, a pub or a club. And the banks are all ready to stop this harm, but because the lobby groups have been so entrenched, and the donations that they give the two big parties have actually led them, most elections, to creating an agreement that they won't talk about pokies during the election.
It's gentleman's agreement, is it?
Right. Yep. So it is very frustrating to see the social cost and the silence because of the political donations that get given to the two big parties. So I, for one, would want to make sure that, yes, they get powered down after midnight. There's a statewide self-exclusion register, that there's more transparency in the venues. We want to see what venues actually are taking the most money and when, so that we can understand how to help people stay away. And it needs to come a lot sooner than 2028.
And the other thing, of course, that the New South Wales Crime Commission said was that clubs and pubs are being used for money laundering.
Yes.
So, how can you argue that you shouldn't have some sort of card to stop, a cashless card?
Yes.
To stop money laundering? It's untenable, a position to say.
Right. I don't imagine that a criminal who's trying to money launder is going to sign up for a cashless gambling card. They're just going to keep using that.
A dumb criminal might, but that's about it.
Or a problem gambler, they're not going to sign up for it either, right?
Okay, we're coming close to the end of time. I'd like to thank all those who have sent in questions. We got one more that I would like to end up on. Okay. Joanne, what would be the first thing you do when you get voted in?
Thank you, Joanne. There's a long list. I highly recommend you go to joelinehackman.com.au/policy and have a look at that list. But for me, I know cost of living is a huge issue that's affecting everyone, and I would want to implement cost savings immediately to try and reduce your energy budget. And I'd also want to use the energy transition to make sure that we are on track to meet our emissions reductions and protecting our environment, because looking at this graph, we've been lied to, we've been greenwashed, and I want to fix that. I want to fix that, and I want to save the koalas, and I want to make sure that people can actually afford a good quality of life, because many of the big corporations are not paying tax, or they're offshore tax havens, and 70% of the GDP comes from small businesses that do pay tax, and the burden is on families. And I really want to fix it so that there's better support for families and small businesses and local economies, and not this corruption that's going on at the upper levels. So.
Well, thanks very much, Joeline. It's been great. Thanks to the Northern Beaches mums. Remember, next month, March 25, Joeline Hackman. Make her the first female MP in Manly. It's important.
We've had a lot of great independents, but it's whoever is going to be the best person for the job, and I would argue that that is a strong independent.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Bye.
Bye.